Hi, this is Terry, and what we're going to do in this video is activity-based costing. Activity-based costing is just another way of doing job order costing. So job order, and the difference between the two methods, ultimately, there's other issues, but the big issue is overhead. So direct materials stays the same, direct labor stays the same. What we're going to do is figure out what overhead is doing. There are so many slides in this handout that I'm going to skip most of them and rely on me just going through the numbers and giving you the theory while you see the numbers. But I would like to look at this slide, and I went ahead and pre-highlighted some of this. In the traditional costing system, so what we're talking about, plain old job order costing, all the manufacturing costs go to the products. The non-manufacturing costs don't. So direct materials, direct labor, and overhead are our product cost. Our non-product costs, or our period costs, which would be things like selling and administrative, those kind of costs. If it's not part of making the product, then goes to the period costs or the non-manufacturing. The other issue is that all the overhead goes into one big cost pool and is divided by some kind of cost driver. Remember when we studied this, we did the estimated overhead divided by the estimated cost driver, and that gave us an application rate, right? All right. Um, that's not true with activity-based costing. Activity-based costing turns around and says, instead of applying that overhead based on one pool, one cost driver, let's have as many cost drivers as you want. So we'll have many multiple drivers, and what we will do is rearrange all of our overhead costs into pools. So let's get to some numbers and see if this will make sense. I'm not going to worry about that one. So let's use this slide. I guess I should arrow up and show you. It's slide 7. Here's what's going on. We've got direct materials, we've got direct labor, and we have our overhead costs. Our total overhead costs that we incurred for this particular example is 1,810,000. What's different in activity-based costing is we now take that 1,810,000 and divide it into pools, and then this miscellaneous pool for everything that does not fit in the others. So we can identify 320,000 costs, overhead cost occurred because of customer orders. Out of that 1.8 million, 252 occurred because of product design. 380 was based on physically making the product, so the order size, and then customer relationships and other. Then what we would do is we would keep track of how many customer orders we had. We take the 320 divided by the customer orders and come up with a price per order. Price per design, price per machine hour, price per customer. What we did before was we took that 1,810,000 and we just divide it by something like direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, or machine hours. That's an L there. Then we would just look how many labor hours we used. We'd multiply it times that application rate, and that's how much was applied. This method says, let's not do that. Let's break this up as many pools as what we want to keep track of. So let me just make kind of a side little example. Let's say that we were making 5 products and 2 of them used computer time and 3 of them did not for whatever reason. Then under activity-based costing, they're saying the cost of the computer, so you're going to depreciate the computer, the cost of it should be absorbed only by those 2 products, and these 3 products here that do not use computer time shouldn't have to pay for it. The old way was everything was just thrown into one big shoebox and you paid for it whether you used that resource or not. So the old way was say, all right, we've got 5 products and that cost of the computer is split over all 5 of those products. Activity-based costing says, no, let's not do it that way. Let's keep track of who used the resource. If they use the resource, they pay for it. And by the way, this is the kind of the final result. So I'm just going to look at a couple more slides. Even that's going to take a couple minutes. We turn around and say, okay, for the overhead costs here, then we have indirect wages, we got depreciation, we got utilities, and the lease on the building, that's $1 million. Then general and administrative was 510 and the marketing department was 300. So of those total overhead costs, this would be the breakdown based on the traditional approach. Right? This is the hard part. Management of some type would have to turn around and say, okay, here's our cost pools: customer orders, product design, order size, relation, and other. And what we need to do is say, of this pot of money that we just saw up above, so factory wages was 500,000. Let's keep that in mind. Let's, matter of fact, keep a couple of them in mind. 500,000 was the wages, 300 for the equipment. Now let's go down here and look. What we're going to do is say, all right, here's the factory wages and here's the equipment, for example. Then we're going to take that 500,000 and say, okay, 25% of those factory wages came about because of customer orders, 40% because of product design, order size, relationship, and other. So we have to know the distribution of all 100% of that 500,000. Where did it go? The same with the factory equipment. Then what we'll do is we'll take that 500,000, and let me center this a bit. We'll take that 500,000 total, and then we'll take those percentages. So the percentages up above, 25, 40, 20, 10, and 5. Then we'll take 25, 40, 20, 10, and 5 of that 500,000 and say, this is how we're distributing it per pool. We'll do that with all of these items, with all of these. And now, instead of working horizontally with that 500,000, we'll now work vertically and say the pool of customer orders has this breakdown, right? All these breakdowns here is 320. So 320 for that pool, 252 for the product design pool, 380 for the order size pool, etc. Then what we'll do is we'll simply keep track of how many times that pool happened. So we processed in customer orders 1,000 orders. In product design, we had 400 designs. So if we take that total cost that was now the column totals going across here and divide it by how many times that activity occurred, we now have a cost per activity. Then when we multiply this out, and let's just go to the Big Daddy here. Let me arrow down to it. So let's use this slide to kind of give you the theory and see the numbers and see if this makes sense. We're going to contrast the traditional system from the activity-based costing system. And we're going to look at making two products, a standard product and a custom product. So this is like buying standard cabinets or custom made cabinets for your kitchen, or standard window or a custom size window. If you're going to build a house and you use custom windows, they're always cheaper because they just mass produce them. But what if you need a certain size? Well, now you're going to pay more. So I'm going to clear off those numbers here. Matter of fact, we can just kind of do this. We'll erase all this stuff. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And go back to pens and write. All right, we should be good. All right. Notice that the amount of materials and labor are the same under both methods. Right? That's not what's changing. What's changing is how do we apply overhead. So under one method, the manufacturing overhead is going to be $875 for the standard and $125. So what we would be doing is using one cost driver. So one cost driver, such as labor hours or labor dollars, and just applying overhead and saying that if you use this much labor, then you have to absorb this much cost. Under the activity-based costing, now the numbers change. So instead of this manufacturing overhead being $875, it's going to be these numbers. So what we would do is we would look at shipping individually, take the actual shipping cost for the standard product. Then we would look in, say, all right, now we have customer orders. We have no designs because they're the standard, so we don't have to go figure out what size we need or any of those kind of things. It's the off-the-shelf product and then the order size. Under the custom, then they're going to absorb under the traditional approach the 125, but notice that because of the customization, then the shipping is going to be added in, but notice that customer orders has to absorb 128. Product design, because it's custom, every one of those orders has to have a design. Somebody has to figure out what's the height, what's the dimension, what it needs. So whatever this product is that we're making. And then the order size makes a difference. So when push comes to shove, we're going to see that under the standard, the cost of making that product is a little over $2 million. But if we use activity-based costing, it's only $1.7 million. Here's the big deal. This is the whole point of the chapter. Under the traditional approach, the custom product would only cost us $282. Whereas if we use activity-based costing and say if you use the resource, you have to pay for it. So all the overhead costs that occur because of the customization, then you have to pay for it. Now that price is doubled. So if you believe in the traditional system and say that's good, you're going to notice that the standard product has to absorb quite a bit of cost. Whereas if we do activity-based costing, the standard is not paying for anything that it did not incur, which means that the custom products now are much more expensive. So if you multiplied this out and did something like 100% markup, and you did this at 100% markup and did the math, that issue would be, what are you going to sell it for? Which costing method is correct? Did it cost you the 282 for those jobs, or did it cost you 589? And again, by the time you mark this up, that's a significant difference. And it's all an accounting concept. It has nothing to do with the physical, PHY, physical part. Sorry, terrible drawing there, but it has nothing to do with the physical component. It's just what method do you use? Sorry for the bells. What method do you use to keep track of the numbers? Are you going to use a traditional method and say this is what it costs us to make? Or are you going to use activity-based costing and say these are our costs? And you you know it, it's a choice. Which one do you think is best? Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight to the chapter. I think this is definitely a chapter that you have to read the entire chapter and have to read it slowly and methodically to understand what's happening with the numbers and how to do this. All right, hope that helps some. Okay, I've cleared off all the marks, so let's see if we can do the grand finale here. When when we talk about the materials, I got to turn my pen back on. When we talk about the materials, then the 1200 and the 1200 is the same, the 150 and the 150 is the same. What's different now is the application of the overhead. So under the traditional approach, it was based on labor, $50 an hour at $10 or 10 hours is $500. Under the activity-based costing approach, now we're going to take a look here and say activity 1 was $900. That was the special handling of the chocolate. So we come over here and say that $900 has to go to the special chocolate because recipe number 5 needs that $900 worth of handling, keeping the chocolate refrigerated, etc., and being able to process it, whatever. Then what was left was we had 10 hours of labor, but we now have a new application rate. Instead of 50, it's 26. So the combined number now for overhead is only 1160. Right? Or is not only, it is 1160. If we look at the cost based on traditional versus activity, we total these up, divide by the number of portions, we get 185. We total these up, divide by the number of portions, and we get 251. So under activity-based costing, because of the activities that recipe, the cost that recipe creates, then our overhead is significantly higher. Our prices changed. If we look at cocoa mix number 6, we see that the 750, 450, 750, 450 are the same, but the overheads changed. Under the traditional approach, 30 hours of labor at the application rate of 50 is 1500. But under activity-based costing, now what's involved, the amount of money that we're going to charge is for activity 2, because activity 2 only occurs because of the shaving machine, and recipe 6 uses the shaving machine, where recipe 5 was the handling of the special chocolate. So recipe 6, because it involves the shaving machine and we have depreciation, we have $300. Then it's what's left was 30 hours of direct labor, but now at the new rate of 26 is 780. So combined, it's 1080. So if we slide back over and say we add these numbers together, divide by 1200 portions, the cost is 225. If we add these numbers together, divided by 1200 portions, it's 190. So under a traditional approach, we would say that recipe 6 cost us $2.25 per portion. If we use activity-based costing and say that recipe 6 only has to pay for the cost that it incurred, we would now say that the per portion cost is only $1.90 instead of $2.25. So if we doubled these prices, and I kind of did this up top here, if we doubled the prices, we'll just say that our markup is 100%, so the markup and the cost would be 200%. Under the traditional approach, then our selling price for product number recipe number 5, under the traditional approach, our selling price would have to be 370. But if we say activity-based costing is a better method of accounting, we now would have to charge $5.02 for the same exact product. The shaved chocolate recipe under the traditional approach is $4.50, but if we say activity-based costing is the better approach, now the selling price drops to $3.80. So, ta-dum, 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 that's the grand finale. Is the traditional approach a better approach, or is activity-based costing? And as you can see, the selling price changes based on which approach you use. I hope this is helpful. I know it's a tough chapter. Again, make sure you read the chapter, walk through it very slowly, look at all the numbers, and I think you'll be fine.